Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on when you're watching this video. This is Mr. Messina here to talk to you about photosynthesis. Now, as we're wrapping up our unit on cellular respiration and then metabolism, we definitely need to talk about photosynthesis. Now, a lot of students don't realize that photosynthesis is part of a great and wonderful cycle called metabolism. We've talked about cellular respiration, which occurs in the mitochondria. And you can see that right here. This is a good example of a mitochondria right down here. You can see that in our mitochondria, we take glucose and oxygen, take it through the mitochondria, through the Krebs cycle, and then we get this stuff over here, which is carbon dioxide and water. Now, a lot of you guys will realize that carbon dioxide is something that plants desperately need, and plants desperately need water as well. You can all think that, plants definitely need water, they need to be outside and get rained on, or if you have a parent that gardens, or if you garden, you definitely know about watering. This carbon dioxide idea, though, is kind of a little confusing. A lot of people think that plants get so big and strong, they get all the carbon they need to actually be big and strong. They think they get it from the soil. That's actually not true. They totally get it from carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out. They take this water, carbon dioxide, and then they add a little sunshine to it, and guess what? They go all the way back here to oxygen and glucose. That's why we always talk about this as being a cycle. We start with glucose and O2. We go through cellular respiration to get carbon dioxide and water, go through photosynthesis so we can go back to O2 and glucose. All the while, this giant circle is going around and around and around and around. And the reason is we want to convert sunlight over here to ATP. Now, like I said before, photosynthesis takes place in plants. So if you ever take a gander at a leaf, which you can see right here, inside leaves there are a bunch of plant cells, and you've seen this plant cell before, I'm sure, in any number of conversations you've had with me or some of the work that you've done. Inside plant cells, you have a chloroplast, and I know we talked about that during organelles, and we said chloroplasts are special organelles that actually make sugars. They can make sugars because they're made up of a bunch of these little thachyloids, these things right here. Now, these thachyloids, you can see them in this chloroplast figure right here. You can see right here that there's tons of those things inside this membrane sac. So that's actually not very different from a mitochondria in that it contains all the materials it needs. Inside these little thachyloids, they have their own membranes, and they contain other materials in this space here. Specifically, they have chlorophyll, which is what lets them absorb sunlight and turn it into sugars. And more importantly, it also gives them that delightful green color. Inside these thachyloids, if you look at the membrane, here's a phospholipid membrane of the thachyloid. They have these proteins that are actually stuck inside that membrane. You can see this one right here. Inside that membrane, you have these proteins, and they have all kinds of special things that they do. Specifically, this one actually has a water splitting enzyme. So it takes water, which we know comes from, watering cans, the rain, things like that. It starts off with water and actually makes oxygen, which is released. It takes water, makes oxygen, it gives some hydrogen ions, which are hanging out, but most importantly, it frees up some electrons. Those electrons are going to be very important later. So remember, photosynthesis, it takes place in plants, specifically inside chloroplasts, and inside chloroplasts you have these thachyloids. Now, as I said before, all of our energy comes from the sun. So right over here, this sun is doing all kinds of stuff. The sun is what powers the chlorophyll, which, like I said before on the previous slide, is in those thachyloids, which is in the chloroplasts. The energy from the sun, plus this carbon dioxide, plus this water over here, that's what happens. It makes glucose. Glucose is formed. And oxygen is released as a byproduct, guys. So this has oxygen right here, this O2 that gets spat off. That's a byproduct. For plants, it's waste. It's like our version of carbon dioxide. The plant, it's actually more interested in glucose. primarily because glucose can be used for energy. I'm going to abbreviate it to N-er, might as well just say G2, which we know of in the form of ATP. And sugars are also used to actually build the plant. So the leaves, the roots, everything is actually made out of these sugars. They're building block molecules. Now, as I said before, this photosynthesis produces very specific products. Now, you can tell right here, we start with carbon dioxide and we start with water, which you can see right here. Carbon dioxide, that's one carbon and then two oxygens, which is one oxygen and a little two subscript. And then water. Water is actually something called dihydrogen monoxide, or in super scientific terms, water. Water actually is made up of two hydrogen atoms here and then linked with one oxygen atom over here. Okay? So we start with carbon dioxide and water, and we combine it with light energy, and we get glucose, which glucose actually is this complicated molecule. It's C6H12O6. That's 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, and 6 oxygens. And then you have 6 leftover oxygens remaining. This is this material right here. So in a plant, like I said before, undergoes photosynthesis. It takes our old carbon dioxide, which is here, and our old water, and then combines it with some light energy and makes glucose and oxygen out of it. So it's a very effective and efficient recycling program, especially for plants, because plants have not only chloroplasts, but they also have mitochondria. Now, the chloroplasts themselves, like I said before, only plants have them. They're in plants only. They're somewhat complicated, but actually not very, guys. The thackyloid is folded, looks like a stack of pancakes. These things right here, the thackyloids, you can see right here, this is where the photosynthesis magic happens. The stoma is the surrounding tissue that stacks the thackyloids. So if you imagine like a whole bunch of coins that are stacked together, these stroma actually sit and hang out, and their job is just to hold those stacks up. They're just support structure. The chlorophyll are actually found inside the thackyloids. The chlorophyll molecules, they're embedded in the thackyloid, which means they're in the membrane. Since they're in the membrane, they're sort of kind of like our membrane proteins that we talked about when we talked about cell transport. They just hang out in that membrane, and their only job is to absorb energy. Check it out, right over here. So remember, the molecules, they are embedded in the thackyloid membrane, and their job is to absorb energy from sunlight. So ultimately, the photosynthesis reactions all come from sunlight itself. So the energy from the sun is used to separate CO2. So we're effectively breaking up that carbon from those two oxygen. That carbon that we just broke up, so this one right here, then bonds with water to form glucose. Now, I know you guys are like, wait a minute, Mr. Messina, there's 6 carbon over here, there's only 1 carbon here. It's okay. And then you're going to be like, whoa, wait a minute. There's 1 water here, which only has 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. And this hydrogen over here has 12, and this has 6. Once again, it's okay, guys. These reactions work consistently. So more than 1 carbon and more than 1 water is needed. So effectively, this carbon bonding to the water to form glucose, it's creating chemical energy. So the glucose is burnt or converted to a starch, which means it's actually stored. Those glucoses can actually all be linked into a long chain, like we talked about before, and that long chain is certainly a starch. That is its official definition and term. The leftover oxygen is released into the atmosphere through the stoma. And if you actually look at the bottom, like with a microscope, if you actually look at the bottom of the leaves in some kind of plant, you can actually see little pores that this oxygen is released through. So keep in mind that all of our energy comes from the sun. All of it. All of it. We may not absorb sunlight, but we eat animals, which in turn have eaten plants, which have in turn gotten their energy from the sun. Sun's a big deal. Look at it. It's awesome. The main reason the sun is such a big deal is without the sun, we would not survive, even though we don't directly use sunlight for what we need. Carbon dioxide and water are taken in by the plants. So remember, we need to start with CO2, which is what we breathe, the byproducts of cell respiration, CO2 and water, which is also released in cell respiration. So these two things have to go inside of a plant, and then the plant absorbs the light from the sun, takes the light from the sun. Now, we talked about the thalloid membranes, and we talked about how they produce sugar. Those are light dependent. This reaction right here is absolutely 100% light dependent, which means it needs sunlight to work. No sunlight doesn't work. However, to finish building the sugar, it's light independent, which means it doesn't need light. No light and it still would work. All right? And we're gonna talk about that in a little bit. These light independent reactions, that's where oxygen is actually released as the byproduct. So this right here is where the oxygen comes from, these light independent reactions. So once we go through all of these steps here, we're going to have a single sugar. So the plants will actually store these sugars as starch. And all that means is they take a sugar and they add it to another sugar, to another sugar, to another sugar, and make these big long chains. So remember when I was talking about the light dependent reactions? This only happens in sunlight, like I said before. No sun, no light dependent reactions. So the light is absorbed by the chlorophyll molecules, which are found in these thalloids. You can see a really good picture over here. And take a look right there. You can just see them stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked. And then light is absorbed by the chlorophyll molecules that are living inside those thalloids. That energy actually drives production of ATP. So we're actually taking ADP and turning it into ATP using this kind of light energy. So it's kind of a twofer for the plant. They not only get enough energy to roll and actually work, but they also get extra energy that they can store in the form of glucose. Now the light independent reactions, that's also known as the Calvin cycle, which you can see right over here. This means no light is necessary. No light needed. Now, it happens in sunlight and in the dark, like I said. So if you took a plant into a cave, it couldn't do the light-dependent reactions, but it could totally do the light-independent reactions. So the ATP generated in the light reactions drives the Calvin cycle. So this energy actually is used up all here. So all the energy that they used up to start gets used up over here to drive the Calvin cycle, which takes this CO2 and it starts making glucose. And like I said before, this occurs in the stroma, all right? That's that connective material that actually holds those membrane thalloids up. The monosaccharides, which are the glucose, that's this guy right here, they're manufactured in the Calvin cycle. So the light-dependent cycle just collects a bunch of energy to drive the independent cycle, which is hanging out over here. These glucose molecules are then used to build polysaccharides, which is a starch. You can see right here we have a bunch of these individual glucose molecules. There's one, here's another one. All of these different things all of these different glucoses are linked together. And as a result of these glucoses being linked together, you can see here, 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 all of those individual ones, they all have an oxygen binding them together. Well, oxygen comes in pairs, so it's O2. That means one oxygen went over here, so that's one, and then another one actually is used to do some more binding and is released later. So that's our summary. Remember, guys, the sun actually supercharges these things, which are chloroplasts. These chloroplasts are full of thalloid materials, those little suborganelles, if you will, that store chlorophyll, which is this cool stuff over here. The chlorophyll will absorb energy from the sun, Let me get that cleaned. It'll absorb energy from the sun, and once it has that energy from the sun, it makes ATP out of it. So this whole section right here, from the red line up, all of that needs sunlight. These are the light-dependent reactions. So sunlight gets absorbed, creates some energy. That energy goes over here and enters the Calvin cycle, the light-independent section. This Calvin cycle takes carbon dioxide, takes energy, and starts manufacturing these sugars. Starts spitting them out, and all these sugars are chained together over here into starches or polysaccharides. All right, that's all I have for you guys. You have a splendid evening, morning, or whatever else you saw this video. Tune in next time. Talk to you later.